The ASUS Scar 3 is a new gaming laptop, but just how well does it perform in games? I've benchmarked 20 different games at all setting levels to show you how well it runs, and compared it against some other gaming laptops to see how it stacks up. Just quickly before we jump into the benchmark results, I'll cover off the specs in my unit. I've got the G531GW model, which means there's an Intel i7-9750H CPU, Nvidia RTX 2070 graphics, and that's the full 2070, no Max-Q here. 16GB of memory running in dual channel and a 240Hz screen. The Scar 3 is available in a few different configurations. You can check updated prices for different models in the description. I was running Windows 10 with the latest Nvidia drivers available with the turbo profile enabled for best performance. And we're only looking at out-of-the-box gaming performance here. If you're new to the channel, get subscribed for the upcoming full review which will cover everything. We'll start off with the results from all 20 games at all setting levels, then compare with some other laptops afterwards to see how the Scar 3 stacks up. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode and not in multiplayer mode, as it's easier to consistently reproduce the test run. The purple bars show the results with ray tracing disabled, while the green bars show RTX on. As always seems to be the case, this game looks better, at least in my opinion, with RTX off with ultra settings, and we can see this performs better than RTX on at low settings. RTX on only really starts looking nice at high to me, so it depends if you want to play a first-person shooter below 50 FPS. Battlefield 1 was also tested in campaign mode, and like usual was running well. Ultra still delivered above 100 FPS, with not really much to gain at lower settings, so it probably makes sense to just enjoy the higher settings. Apex Legends was tested with either all settings at maximum or all settings at the lowest possible values, as it doesn't have predefined setting presets. It still played well at ultra settings. However, we could boost average FPS by 45% with all graphical settings set to minimum. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark. The results from this test were looking good at higher settings, but we'll see how these results compare to some other laptops soon. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark. I wasn't seeing too much difference in this test over some 2060 laptops I've tested. For instance, the Dell G7 scored 75 FPS at ultra settings. This is just one title though. For the most part, as we'll see later, the 2070 is a nice amount ahead of the 2060. It just depends on the game. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results were ahead of the newer Far Cry New Dawn just covered, and we'll see how this one compares to some other laptops later. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and while I have to regularly refresh the replay due to updates, I test in the same area, so results should be somewhat comparable to my past ones. Maximum settings were easily getting us above 100 FPS, with closer to 200 possible at low and medium. Overwatch is another well-optimized game and was tested in the practice range, as other players, bots, and even different maps in actual gameplay affect the frame rate, and this allows for consistent testing. Even at maximum, above 170 FPS averages were possible, while even high settings allows us to make good use of the 240Hz panel. Metro Exodus was also tested using the built-in benchmark. Most parts of the game perform a fair bit better than this, so don't take these results as a good indication of what to expect throughout the entire game. It's more of a worst case, but does let you perform the same test to compare against. CSGO was tested using the Uletical FPS benchmark, and like always, high frame rates were coming out of this test. Minimum settings were almost averaging 240 FPS, a nice matchup for the 240Hz screen. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and is a game I've found to benefit from Nvidia's new Turing architecture. Even with maximum ultra settings, 144 FPS averages were possible in this test, nearing closer to the 200 mark with the low preset. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and over 100 FPS was possible even with the settings maxed out at ultra. However, the results aren't too different from other lower spec machines I've tested. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark, and from my experience, seems to be a fairly CPU heavy game. The results here looked alright. I haven't yet used too many 9th gen laptops, but I have seen much worse from throttling 8750H machines. Dota 2 was tested playing in the middle lane with an average amount of action going on, and it was running very smoothly without any problems at all. I've found this to depend quite a bit on the CPU, so even with our 2070, the results aren't much different compared to a lower spec machine. Watch Dogs 2 was often maxing out the CPU using all resources it can get a hold of. However, personally, I can play it just fine with 30 FPS. So even at ultra settings, we're seeing quite a good result for this game. Ghost Recon is another resource-intensive game and was tested using the built-in benchmark. I've only really seen 60 FPS and higher at ultra settings from a thick high-end gaming laptop, not counting a PC of course, so these results are looking pretty good. The Witcher 3 was playing very well, with ultra settings almost averaging 100 FPS and above 60 for the 1% low. Considering that I don't think this game needs a super high frame rate, I thought this was a good result, easily playable while looking great. Doom was tested using Vulkan, and is a game that almost always gets really high frame rates. I wasn't seeing that much of a practical difference between the different setting levels, so might as well just play maxed out at Ultra and still get well above 100 FPS. Strange Brigade was another game that was tested with Vulkan, and this one was also running well. At Ultra settings, even the 1% low was above 100 FPS, with much higher possible at lower settings. Shadow of War was tested with the built-in benchmark, and is another game that I've found a benefit from Nvidia's new Turing architecture. Even with very high settings, 100 FPS averages were possible in this test. Let's also take a look at how this config of the ASUS SCAR 3 compares with other laptops to see how it stacks up. Use these results as a rough guide only, as they were tested at different times with different drivers. In Battlefield 5, I've got the SCAR 3 highlighted in red. Compared to the other machines I've recently tested, it's doing quite well. Not quite as good as the 2080 Max-Q machines above it, but not too far behind, and still quite a bit better than most others due to the full 2070. It was just slightly ahead of the only other 2070 machine I've tested so far, the Aorus 15. Here are the results from Far Cry 5 with ultra settings and the built-in benchmark. This time the Aorus 15 with same specs is much closer to the SCAR 3, and the SCAR 3 is actually ahead of two of the 2080 Max-Q machines. The GX701 dominates because it was tested with G-Sync, so no Optimus bottlenecks allow it to perform better. These are the results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the built-in benchmark at highest settings. The results are pretty similar to what we've seen before. The SCAR 3 is way up there thanks to the 2070, just 1 FPS behind the Aorus 15 with same specs. Otherwise, only behind the 2080 Max-Q machines. Overall, the results here are looking quite good, at least at the higher setting levels where the 2070 can stretch its legs. Like I mentioned in my first video covering 240Hz gaming laptops, the 240Hz screen was only really beneficial in esports titles like CSGO or Overwatch that can actually push out crazy high frame rates. All games that I threw at the SCAR 3 ran without issue. At lower settings, I did notice lower performance in some cases, which may indicate some form of CPU throttling, but I'll investigate that in depth in the upcoming thermal testing video. To be fair though, with a 2070 laptop, you're unlikely to be playing at lower settings in most cases anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. So how do you guys think the new ASUS SCAR 3 gaming laptop held up in these games? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and get subscribed so you don't miss the upcoming full review, which will include everything you need to know about this laptop.